Comment down below what country and or city you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you guys. Also subscribe and like if you hate racial injustice. Alright, let's get to it. Ever had one of those days where you felt like you'd accidentally stumbled into a bizarre, low-budget sitcom? That was my Tuesday. It started innocently enough. I, Marcus Jones, average middle schooler with a penchant for video games and a mild allergy to gym class, was just trying to survive Mrs. Crabtree's history lesson. Mrs. Crabtree. Even her name sounded like something dredged from the bottom of a polluted harbor. She was the kind of teacher who made you believe history was invented solely to punish children. The air in her classroom always hung thick with the scent of stale mothballs and simmering resentment. And today, that resentment seemed particularly directed at me. I wasn't sure what I'd done to deserve such special attention. Maybe it was my hair. I'd recently gotten it braided, a style I was quite proud of. Maybe she found it too urban, a word she wielded like a rusty shiv whenever she wanted to express disapproval without actually saying anything overtly offensive. The trouble began innocently enough. She was droning on about the Civil War, a topic she seemed to relish a little too much. Then, out of the blue, she stopped mid-sentence, her gaze locking onto me like a heat-seeking missile. "Marcus," she announced, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "I understand you have artistic inclinations." Now, my artistic inclinations consisted mainly of doodling elaborate spaceships in the margins of my notebook. Nothing that screamed prodigy, or even particularly inclined. I stammered, I draw a little." "Excellent. Then you'll be thrilled to hear we have a violin here that's been sadly neglected. Perhaps you could enlighten us with a little performance?" My heart sank faster than a lead balloon in a swimming pool. I knew where this was going. I could feel it in my bones, a cold, creeping dread that only a passive-aggressive racist teacher could inspire. The class snickered. I felt my face burning. This was going to be a disaster of epic proportions. Was she really going to make me, a kid who barely knew which end of a violin was up, play in front of the whole class? And why, oh why, did it feel so racially charged? The violin itself looked like it had seen better centuries. It was a dusty, scarred thing, stored in a case that smelled suspiciously of mildew and forgotten dreams. Mrs. Crabtree practically shoved it into my hands, her eyes gleaming with a malicious glee that she probably thought was cleverly disguised as encouragement. "Go on, Marcus," she urged, her voice a theatrical whisper. "Don't be shy. Express yourself." I fumbled with the instrument, feeling incredibly awkward. I had never held a violin before in my life. The wood felt cold and unfamiliar against my skin. The strings looked like a tangled mess of possibilities, none of them good. I looked around the room, desperate for some kind of escape. My classmates were watching me with a mixture of amusement and pity. Even the perpetually bored kids in the back row were paying attention. I tried to remember if I'd ever even seen someone play the violin properly. Maybe on TV? There was that one episode of The Simpsons, where Lisa was really good, but that didn't seem particularly helpful at the moment. Mrs. Crabtree cleared her throat, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Well, Marcus? We're waiting." I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and braced myself for the inevitable train wreck. I lifted the violin to my chin, feeling the weight shift precariously. I had no idea how to hold it correctly. The bow felt equally foreign, like a clumsy extension of my arm. I drew the bow across the strings. The sound that emerged was less than musical. It was more like a strangled cat being tortured with a rusty cheese grater. A collective groan swept through the classroom. Even Mrs. Crabtree winced, though I suspected she was secretly enjoying my misery. "Perhaps," she suggested, her voice dripping with faux concern, "a simple scale would be a good place to start?" A simple scale. As if. I was pretty sure I couldn't even produce a single note that wouldn't shatter glass. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me completely fail. I decided to try something, anything, to salvage the situation. I closed my eyes again, and a melody began to formulate in my head. The melody that came to me wasn't anything I consciously chose. It was like it had been lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for the right moment to escape. It was a blues riff, a soulful lament that echoed the struggles and triumphs of generations past. It resonated like I had been playing it for years. It wasn't smooth or polished or technically perfect. It had rough edges, a raw energy that surprised even me. But it was real. And it was coming from me, from this dusty, forgotten violin, in the middle of Mrs. Crabtree's dreary history class. The groans subsided. The snickers faded. A hush fell over the room. Even Mrs. Crabtree seemed momentarily stunned into silence. The notes I played were a discordant mix, more heart than skill, still finding their place, but the raw emotion was undeniably there. I kept playing, lost in the music, oblivious to the faces in the room. The blues riff morphed into a more complex melody, a blend of jazz and classical influences that I didn't even know I possessed. My fingers danced across the strings, guided by something beyond my conscious control. I could feel the energy in the room shifting. The amusement and pity were replaced by something else. Respect? Awe? Even Mrs. Crabtree's expression had changed. The malicious glee was gone, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. It was a train wreck, yes, but in the same way a controlled demolition is. Unbeknownst to me, our school principal, Mr. Thompson, was walking past the classroom at that exact moment. He'd been on his way to a budget meeting, a task he generally approached with the enthusiasm of a condemned man facing the guillotine. But the sound of the unique violin playing had stopped him in his tracks. Intrigued, and perhaps slightly alarmed, he paused outside the door, his ear pressed against the wood. What he heard was a cacophony of sound giving way to something surprisingly beautiful. Then, he heard Mrs. Crabtree's voice, but not speaking in delight. She was saying, "Well, well, Marcus. Who knew the little ghetto boy had a hidden talent? A regular Mozart of the inner city." That was enough for Mr. Thompson. He was a man of impeccable integrity, and a zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination. He quietly moved closer to the door, positioning himself to overhear everything that followed. As I continued to play, lost in my impromptu performance, Mr. Thompson's face hardened. He recognized talent when he heard it, and he also recognized blatant racism when he heard that. He had suspected Mrs. Crabtree of inappropriate behavior before, but this was the smoking gun, or rather, the discordant violin. He'd been gathering intel on getting rid of her for months. When my impromptu performance finally ended, I opened my eyes to a room full of stunned faces. Even Mrs. Crabtree looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant rumble of the school bus pulling up outside. Then Mr. Thompson strode into the room, his expression grim. "Mrs. Crabtree," he said, his voice booming with authority, "I believe a word in my office is in order." "Now." Mrs. Crabtree's face paled. She stammered, But Mr. Thompson, I was just—" "Now, Mrs. Crabtree," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. He glanced at me with a subtle nod of approval before ushering the disgraced teacher out of the room. The rest of the day was a blur. Rumors flew through the school like wildfire. Everyone was talking about my performance, about Mrs. Crabtree's attitude, and about Mr. Thompson's sudden, dramatic intervention. The next day, it was announced that Mrs. Crabtree had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Everyone knew what that really meant. She was gone. Fired. Finally, someone had put an end to her reign of petty tyranny and thinly veiled prejudice. Karma, it seemed, had a particularly sharp ear for a badly played violin. My classmates, who had snickered at me before, started treating me with a newfound respect. Some even asked me for violin lessons, a prospect that filled me with both amusement and terror. I was far from a master violinist, but I had, apparently, tapped into something real, something powerful, something that had silenced a racist teacher and captivated a school. The weeks that followed were surprisingly pleasant. The air in the history classroom seemed lighter, fresher, free of the stifling scent of mothballs and resentment. Our new history teacher, Mr. Abernathy, was a young, enthusiastic man who actually seemed to enjoy teaching. He even let me play some blues during a lesson on the Harlem Renaissance, a moment that solidified my status as the school's resident musical anomaly. And I'm pretty sure he knew. As for me, I started taking actual violin lessons. Turns out, I wasn't half bad. I still preferred video games, but I had discovered a hidden talent, a voice that I never knew I possessed. And I had learned a valuable lesson: sometimes, the most unexpected moments can reveal the most surprising truths. And not to be racist. But the best part: hearing through the grapevine that Mrs. Crabtree was now working as a cashier at a discount grocery store, her sour demeanor apparently scaring away customers. It seemed the universe had a sense of humor, and a keen appreciation for poetic justice. I guess karma paid her a visit. I smiled, thinking of Mrs. Crabtree, and plucked the violin once, a single note, resonant, full of potential. The sweet symphony of justice, indeed.